Welcome to the Reading the Bible Daily with Dave podcast. This podcast is devoted to helping increase your daily exposure to God's Word with a short scripture reading and brief commentary on key ideas, themes, and theology in each chapter. Now please join your host, Dave Jenkins, for today's episode.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Reading the Bible Daily with Dave podcast. My name is Dave, and I'm the host for this show. And today is March 12th, and today we're going to look at Judges 19:1 through Judges 21:25. Now, just by way of a reminder, every day I read from one chapter of God's Word, and then I offer a brief explanation of key ideas, themes, and the theology in that chapter. My goal is to get you into God's Word for about 5 to 20 minutes or so every day. So let's get to our reading today from Judges 19:1 through Judges 21:25. And Judges 19:1 through Judges 21:25 says this: In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a certain Levite was sojourning in the remotest parts of the hill country of Ephraim, who took himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And his concubine was unfaithful to him, and she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there some 4 months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and to bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple of donkeys, and she brought him into her father's house. And when the girl's father saw him, he came with joy to meet him. And his father-in-law, the girl's father, made him stay, and he remained with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and spent the night there. And on the 4th day they arose early in the morning, and he prepared to go. But the girl's father said to his son-in-law, Strengthen your heart with a morsel of bread, and after that you may go. So the two of them sat and ate and drank together. And the girl's father said to the man, Be pleased to spend the night, and let your heart be merry. And when the man rose up to go, his father-in-law pressed him till he spent the night there again. And on the 5th day he arose early in the morning to depart. And the girl's father said, Strengthen your heart, and wait until the day declines. And so they ate both of them. And when the man and his concubine and his servant rose up to depart, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, Behold, now the day has waned towards evening. Please spend the night. Behold, the day draws to its close. Lodge here, and let your money be merry, and tomorrow you shall rise early in the morning for your journey and go home. But the man would not spend the night. He rose up and departed and arrived opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. He had with him a couple of saddled donkeys, and his concubine was with him. And when they were near Jebus, the day was nearly over. And the servant said to his master, Come now, let us turn aside to this city of the Jebusites and spend the night in it. And his master said to him, We will not turn aside into the city of foreigners who do not belong to the people of Israel, but we will pass on to Gibeah. And he said to his young man, Come, and let us draw nearer to one of these places and spend the night at Gibeah or at Ramah. And so they passed on and went their way. And the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belonged to Benjamin. And they turned aside there to go in and spend the night at Gibeah. And he went in and sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into his house to spend the night. And behold, an old man was coming from his work in the field at evening. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was sojourning in Gibeah. And the men of the place were Benjamites. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, Where are you going, and where do you come from? And he said to him, We are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim from which I come. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I am going to the house of the Lord, but no one has taken me into his house. We have straw and feed for our donkeys, with bread and wine for me, and your female servant, and the young man with your servants. There is no lack of anything. And the old man said, Peace be to you. I will care for you and all your wants. Only do not spend the night in the square. And so he brought him into his house and gave the donkeys feed. And they washed their feet and ate and drank. And as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows, surrounded the house, beating on the door. And they said to the old man, the master of the house, Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him. And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Since this man has come into my house, do not do this vile thing. Behold, here are my virgin daughters and his concubine. Let me bring them out now. Violate them and do with them whatever seems good to you. But against this man, do not do this outrageous thing. But the men would not listen to him. And so the man seized his concubine and made her out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until the morning. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go. And as the morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was until it was light. And her master rose up in the morning, and when he opened the doors of the house and went out on his way, behold, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house, with her hands on the threshold. And he said to her, Get up, let's be going. But there was no answer. And then he put her on the donkey, and the man rose up and went away to his home. And when he entered the house, he took a knife, and taking hold of his concubine, he divided her limb by limb into 20 pieces, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. And all who saw it said, Such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day that the people of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak. And then all the people of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, and the congregation assembled as one man to the Lord at Mizpah. And the chiefs of all the people and of all the tribes of Israel presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 men on foot that drew the sword. Now the people of Benjamin heard that the people of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. And the people of Israel said, Tell us, how did this evil happen? And the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, I came to Gibeah that belongs to Benjamin, I and my concubine, to spend the night. And the leaders of Gibeah rose up against me and surrounded the house against me by night. They meant to kill me, and they violated my concubine, and she is dead. So I took hold of my concubine and cut her in pieces, sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel, for they have committed an abomination and outrage in Israel. Behold, you people of Israel, all of you, give your advice and counsel here. And all the people arose as one man, saying, None of us will go to his tent, and none of us will return to his house. But now this is what we will do. We will go to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot, and we will take 10 men out of 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, and 100 of 1,000, 1,000 of 10,000, to bring provisions for the people, that when they come, they may repay Gibeah of Benjamin for all the outrage that they have committed in Israel. So all the men of Israel gathered against the city, united as one man. And the tribes of Israel sent men throughout all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, What evil is this that has taken place among you? Now therefore give up the men, the worthless fellows in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and purge evil from Israel. But the Benjamites would not listen to the voice of their brothers, the people of Israel. Then the people of Benjamin came out together out of the cities to Gibeah to go out to battle against the people of Israel. And the people of Benjamin mustered out of their cities on that day 26,000 men who drew the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who mustered 700 chosen men. Among all these were 700 chosen men who were left-handed, everyone who could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. And the men of Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 men who drew the sword. All these were men of war. The people of Israel arose and went up to Bethel and inquired of God, Who shall go up first for us to fight against the people of Benjamin? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up first. Then the people of Israel rose in the morning and encamped against Gibeah. And the men of Israel went out to fight against Benjamin, and the men of Israel drew up to battle line against them at Gibeah. The people of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and destroyed on that day 22,000 men of the Israelites. But the men of Israel, took courage and again formed the battle line in the same place where they had formed it on the first day. The people of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until the evening. And they inquired, Lord, shall we again draw near to fight our brothers, the people of Benjamin? And the Lord said, Go up against them. And so the people of Israel came came near against the people of Benjamin the second day. And Benjamin went against them out of Gibeah the second day and destroyed 18,000 men of the people of Israel. All these were men who drew the sword. Then the people of Israel, the whole army, went up and came to Bethel and wept. They sat there before the Lord and fasted day until evening and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. The people of Israel inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant was there in those days, and Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, ministered before it in those days, saying, Shall we go out once more to battle against our brothers, the people of Benjamin, or shall we cease? And the Lord said, Go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand. So Israel set men in ambush against Gibeah. And the people of Israel went up against the people of Benjamin on the third day and set themselves in array against Gibeah, as at other times. And the people of Benjamin went out against the people and were drawn away from the city. And as at other times, they began to strike and kill some of the people in the highways, one of which goes up to Bethel and the other to Gibeah, and in the open country about 30 men of Israel. And the people of Benjamin said, They are routed before us as the first. But the people of Israel said, Let us flee and draw them away from the city to the highways. And all the men of Israel rose up out of their place and set themselves in array at Baal Tamor. And the men of Israel who were in ambush rushed out of their place from Marba Gibeah, and there came out against Gibeah 10,000 chosen men out of all of Israel. And the battle was hard, but the Benjamites did not know that the disaster was close upon them. And the Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel, and the people of Israel destroyed 25,100 men of Benjamin that day. All these were men who drew the sword. So the people of Benjamin saw that they were defeated. The men of Israel gave ground to Benjamin because they trusted the men in ambush, whom they had set against Gibeah. Then the men in ambush hurried and rushed against Gibeah. The men in ambush moved out and struck all the city with the edge of the sword. Now the appointed signal between the men of Israel and the men in the main ambush was that when they had made a great cloud of smoke rise out of the sky, the men of Israel should turn in battle. Now Benjamin had begun to strike and even kill about 30 men of Israel. So they said, Surely they are defeated before us, as in the first battle. But when the signal began to rise out of the city in a column of smoke, the Benjamites looked behind them, and behold, the whole of the city went up in the smoke to heaven. And the men of Israel turned, and the men of Benjamin were dismayed, for they saw the disaster was upon them. Therefore they turned their backs before the men of Israel in the direction of the wilderness, but the battle overtook them. And those who came out of the cities were destroying them in their midst. Surrounding the Benjamites, they pursued them and trod them down from Nohah as far as the opposite of Gibeah on the east. 18,000 men of Benjamin fell, all of them men of valor. And they turned and fled towards the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon. 5,000 of them were cut down in the highways. And then they pursued them hard to Gedom, and 2,000 of them were struck down. So all who fell that day of the Benjamites were 25,000 men who drew the sword, all of them men of valor. But the 600 of them men who turned and fled towards the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon and remained at the rock of Rimmon 4 months. And the men of Israel turned back against the people of Benjamin and struck them with the edge of the sword, the city, men and beasts, and all that they found. And all the towns that they had founded they set on fire. Now the men of Israel had sworn at Mizpah, No one shall give us his daughter in marriage to Benjamin. And the people came to Bethel and sat there till evening before God, and lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. And they said, O Lord, the God of Israel, why has this happened in Israel? And today there should be one tribe lacking in Israel. And the next day the people rose early and built there an altar and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. And the people of Israel said, Which of all the tribes of Israel did not come up in the assembly to the Lord? For they had taken a great oath concerning him who did not come up to the Lord to Mizpah, saying, He shall surely be put to death. And the people of Israel had compassion for Benjamin their brother, saying, One tribe is cut off from Israel this day. What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since we have sworn to the Lord that we would not give them any daughters for our wives? And they said, What one is there of the tribes of Israel that did not did not come up to the Lord to Mizpah. Behold, no one had come up to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For when the people were mustered, behold, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. So the congregation sent 12,000 of their bravest men there, and commanded them, Go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, and the women and the little ones. This is what you shall do. Every male and every woman who has lain with a male you shall devote to destruction. And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man by lying with him, and they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. Then the whole congregation sent word to the people of Benjamin, who were at the rock of Rimmon, and proclaimed peace to them. And Benjamin returned at that time, and they gave them the woman whom they had saved alive of the women of Jabesh Gilead. But they were not enough for them, and the people had compassion on Benjamin, because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. Then the elders of the congregation said, What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since the women are destroyed out of Benjamin? And they said, There must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that a tribe not be blotted out from Israel. And yet we cannot give them wives from our daughters, for the people of Israel had sworn, Cursed be he who gives a wife to Benjamin. So they said, Behold, there is a yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and the south of Lebaneh. And they commanded the people of Benjamin, saying, Go and lie in ambush in the vineyards and watch. If the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances, then come out to the vineyards and snatch each man his wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. And when their father or their brothers come to complain to us, we will say to them, Grant them graciously to us, because we did not take for each man of them his wife in battle. Neither did you give them to them, else you would now be guilty. And the people of Benjamin did so, and took their wives according to their number from the dancers whom they carried off. Then they went and returned to their inheritance, and rebuilt the towns and lived in them. And the people of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and family. And they went out from there, every man to his inheritance. In those days there was no king. Everybody did what was right in their own eyes. Well, this is our reading today from Judges 19:1 through Judges 21:25. Well, it's surely no accident, but part of the wise design of the author of Judges that a story about idolatry is followed so closely by a story about immorality. Only the God who made the world and everything in it, including ourselves, has the absolute right to tell us how to live our lives. He who brought order out of the physical chaos by separating light from darkness also gave order to the moral universe by separating right from wrong. The creator of the world is also its rightful lawgiver and judge. Once we displace him from his rightful place in our lives and allow other things to take his place, we cut ourselves adrift from the only thing that can give moral stability to our lives. There is then no truth, just my truth, your truth, and nor is there any right or wrong, only what seems right or wrong to me, and no common authority we can appeal to when our personal judgments or preferences differ. Without God, we are afloat on the shifting currents of relativism. Everyone does what is right in his or her own lives. The effective refrain of Judges 17-21, and the result is moral chaos. Idolatry and immorality are bedfellows. Where you have one, you also have the other. Sooner or later, you have the other. And so the last 5 chapters of Judges are about a decaying society in which all the institutions that should give stability to life are failing because of the character of those who operate them. So the last part of Judges, it's not pleasant reading, especially chapters 19-21, which I've read. But if we read carefully, we're going to find that even here, God is present, and therefore there is hope. Now we know from our text that there is no king in Israel at this time. A certain Levite was sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country who took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And his concubine was unfaithful to him. And she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there some 4 months. This story opens in a way that links it to the previous one. The absence of a king in chapters 17-18 is associated with chaos. Everybody is doing whatever they want in their own eyes. and this leads us to expect that chaos is only going to continue. The only question is, what form is it going to take? Well, at first, it seems it will be more of the same because, again, we have an apparently unemployed Levite living temporarily somewhere. In other words, the generally disordered state of Israel's religious life continues. The Levite is even staying in the hill country of Ephraim and therefore not far from Micah's house. Will he perhaps replace the Levite who used to work here? Well, we don't know. All he aspires to do, as we know, is to lead a quiet life with a woman of his choice. Now, the expression he took to himself is unexceptional. It may not sit well with modern sensibilities about male-female relationships, but it was normal language for betrothal in Old Testament times. Whether or not the Levite regarded this woman more as his property than his partner remains to be seen. But why is there no talk of love here, and why take her as his concubine rather than as his wife? In the last and the only other passage in which the word concubine occurs in Judges, it spells trouble. And as we're about to see, the same is going to turn out to be the case here. Now, we know that this relationship, it didn't last. In fact, the way that verse 2 follows verse 1 without interruption or explanation, it suggests a very short-lived indeed. Literally, she played the harlot against him, but the ESV is probably right to use. The more moderate term was unfaithful, because as far as we know, the concubine did not leave her husband for other men, but went straight home to her father and stayed there. Her only motive, it seems, was to escape a situation she found intolerable. In other words, her harlotry was metaphorical rather than literal, and her behavior reflects more badly on her husband than on herself. She played the harlot because, rightly or wrongly, she felt she had no alternative. Sadly, it's not uncommon for women to find themselves in that situation, especially in a society that's lost its way morally and where marriage no longer functions as it should. Marriage breakdown, especially when it becomes endemic, is a symptom of a decaying society. Our present passage is only about one such relationship breakdown, but it too is indicative of a more general problem. Now, the previous scene has raised some questions about the Levite's character. The way this one opens, however, seems to indicate that he has some redeeming features. After 4 months, long enough to reflect on what had happened and perhaps his own at least partial responsibility for it, the Levite set out for Bethlehem to get his estranged concubine back. Samson, we recall, had done the same thing in similar circumstances. There is no reference to a gift here as with Samson, who brought his wife a young goat, but the reference to a servant and a couple of donkeys, it's an indication of serious intent. Now, the girl's father seems almost too eager to cultivate a positive relationship with the Levites. He entertains him lavishly for 4 nights and most of 5 days, plying him constantly with wine and food, urging him to repeatedly stay longer. There's no offer of employment here like in the previous story, but given the confused environment of the times, a family connection with the Levite may have had some superstitious value and may have even been regarded as socially advantageous. Now, the return journey gets off to a bad start. Because they don't set off until the afternoon, the travelers arrive opposite Jebus, just 6 miles north of Bethlehem, as the day is drawing to a close, and they already need to think about finding lodgings for the night. Jebus was later conquered by David and renamed Jerusalem, but at this time, it was still a Canaanite city. So rather than stay with foreigners, they press on to Gibeah, a Benjamite town, and arrive just as the sun is setting. Unfortunately, they do not receive the kind of welcome that they expect. They go in and sit down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into his house. It's not a good beginning to their stay. After some embarrassed waiting, though, things start to look up. An old man from Ephraim, a temporary resident in Gibeah, does take pity on them and even invites them in. He is welcoming, he's generous, and they seem set for a pleasant evening with him, but it's not to be. And as they are beginning to enjoy their supper, there is a beating on the door. With loud shouting, and a nightmare scenario begins to unfold, similar in many ways to the terrible night in Sodom described in Genesis 19. A crazed mob of low-life males, worthless fellows, have seen the visitors arrive and demand the man, the Levite, be brought out so they can know and have sex with him. And it's uncertain whether the motive is to humiliate the old man who has done what the rest of the townspeople refuse to do, or xenophobic xenophobia. The Levite and his host are both non-Benjamites, or straightforward, out-of-control lust. But the fact that they asked specifically for the man makes it clear what they intended is homosexual rape. The old man of the house is shocked, but his response is even more shocking, and it shows that he is just as perverted as those outside his house. Now, in order to protect his male guest, he offers his own virgin daughter and the Levite concubine as substitutes in verses 23 and 24. Well, everything is twisted here. The man's misunderstanding of his responsibilities as a host, his use of the terms wickedly, vile, violate, outrageous, and good in a way that subverts their real moral value, his sexism, women are disposable, men are not, and his appeal to blindness to his responsibility as a father. Furthermore, a special edge is given to the awfulness of it all by his reference to his daughters as virgin, recalling the terrible plight of Jephthah's virgin daughter back in Judges 11. The old man's daughters appear to have been saved at the last moment by an even more reprehensible act by the Levite, who sees his concubine and makes her go out to them, and from them all attention is focused on her. The men outside seem to forget both their original demand for the man and the host's offer of two women to satisfy their lust by abusing the poor concubine all night until the morning. When they finally let her go, she staggers back to the door of the house and falls there. She has no strength to open the door or even to cry out. Then, when we think that things can't get any worse, they actually do. Aside the Levite, it gets up. He has apparently had a good night's sleep and prepares to go on his way. When he opens the door, there is his concubine lying with her hand on the threshold as if in silent entreaty. But the Levite is utterly unmoved. Get up, he tells her, let us be going. No answer. And so he puts her on his donkey and goes home. Is she unconscious? Is she dead? And if so, why doesn't he just leave her there, since he obviously cares nothing for her? By this point, he has emptied of everything, her virginity, her dignity, her personhood. She's just an object and probably life itself. The Levite relationship with her is now defined purely in terms of ownership. She is his property, and he takes her home because he apparently still has some use for her. Unfortunately, we're about to see what that quote-unquote use is. Representatives of all the tribes except Benjamin gather at Mizpah near Gibeah to decide what action now to take. It's an impressive gathering, including 400,000 men armed there. This Levite is no deliverer raised up by Yahweh, but the tribes have clearly taken his action as a call to war and ironically have responded in far greater number than for any of the judges in the previous chapters. It gives the Levite a large platform to stand on and a huge audience to play to, which is exactly what he wants. His actions are one indication, but his words are the most revealing. In his warped mind, the Levite has convinced himself that he is the principal victim. He wants revenge on the people of Gibeah, and he intends to use his fellow Levites to get it. And so that's what happens. His appeal to the assembly to give your advice and counsel is effectively a call for them to take sides with him against the men of Gibeah and take revenge on them on his behalf. However, given the manipulation that has taken place, the action that follows will be compromised from the start. It's going to fall short of the complete justice because it's only going to be based on half-truths. The corruption of justice is a terrible thing, and that is what the Levite, for all of his assumed moral outrage, is guilty of here. The result is going to be horrendous. Now, what erupts from the assembly the Levite convened is civil war on a scale never before seen in Israel. The Israelites, who have heard the Levites' account of what happened, demand that the people of Gibeah hand over the culprits to be punished. When the men of Gibeah refuse to do so and instead come out to do battle with them, the Israelites respond by mustering a massive fighting force of their own. Before the battle is joined, something is done that seems to offer hope. The people of Israel arose and went up to Bethel and inquired of God. And the Lord said, Judah shall go up first. When they asked the Lord what to do. This is the first of three inquiries the Israelites will make of God. These inquiries and God's response to them are very significant because they show us what is happening in the minds of the Israelites and between them and the Lord as the war unfolds. Well, the first inquiry shows that the Israelites are confident about the righteous and the eventual outcome of their cause. They're committed to the war, and God's approval is assumed. So how is that campaign to be conducted? Who will lead the others into battle? The answer is that Judah is to do so. But there are some unsettling things about this first inquiry and the reply that is given. It is the same question Israel asked at the very beginning of the book and receives a very similar response. But there Israel was united. Here they are divided. They were fighting the Canaanites. Here they are fighting one another. There they were acting on orders they had been given by Joshua. Here they are acting under the influence of the devious Levite. And most significantly, they were promised victory. Here they are not. In Judges 1:2, the reply was, Judah shall go up, and behold, I have given the land into his hand. Here it is simply, Judah shall go up first. And what follows is a terrible rout in which 22,000 die, and the defeated Israelites are left weeping before the Lord. Well, the Israelites are rightly upset and shattered. So they go up to God again and taking the matter to him again, saying, shall we again draw near to fight against our brothers, the people of Benjamin? The phrase our brothers is new and suggests the Israelites are beginning to doubt the rightness of their cause. Perhaps they are even hoping that God will tell them to desist, but it's not to be. This time the reply is even shorter, and again there is no promise of victory. Go up against them. So the Israelites must have been very confused and troubled at this point. They must have wondered, what is God doing? What will happen if we just repeat what we did yesterday? But God has left them no option, and to their credit, they obey him. The Levites' baleful influence is just beginning to wane, so much so that he features no more in this story, which gives hope that some good may yet come of all the pain. Now, we know that the Israelites are defeated yet again, and another 18,000 of their men lie dead on the battlefield. Now they are desperate, according to verses 26 and 28. These are a broken people. They're at the end of themselves. They're wondering what to do. Here at last is the word that they've been longing for. Just one more battle, one more painful struggle, and the victory is going to be theirs. Energized by what they heard from the Lord, that the Lord will give them into their hand, they set about to go about going to war again, and they do it in a much more creative, strategic way. First, they set an ambush and then feign a full frontal assault, only to retreat when the Benjamites come out to engage them, drawing them away from city, leaving it defenseless. And so when those who had set the ambush came out and cut off any possibility of the Benjamites fleeing into the city, the Israelites turn on them and begin attacking them. The Benjamites are weakened by having to fight on two fronts now, and when the tide begins to turn against them, they have nowhere to go. They stand and fight, but when they see that Gibeah is going up in flames behind them, they know that their situation is helpless. They break ranks and begin to flee, with the Israelites hot in their pursuit. The slaughter continues all day until about 600 Benjamites are left hiding in the rock of Rimmon, a site with hundreds of small caves about 6 miles northeast of Gibeah itself. With light fading, the Israelites decide that they have better things to do than to try to flush them out. They leave them there for now, turn back, and go on a rampage, killing every remaining Benjamite they can find and setting all their towns on fire. Even their animals are not spared. By the time that they're done, 25,000 Benjamites will have died. So justice has finally been done, or has it? There is a huge, perplexing moral issue here. The concubine's death has been avenged. Retribution has been visited on by the rapists and on those who protect them, but at what cost? More than 50,000 fighting men have died, plus all the civilians, the men, the women, and the children who have been caught up in the conflict. Can this be justice? And in particular, what of the wholesale destruction of the rest of Benjamin's towns that was carried out after the battle proper? Is this justifiable action or unjustifiable overreaction? Can a bloodbath like this ever be right? Is the restoration of moral order or a travesty of all that Israel was called to be and do? Now, more importantly, what are we to make of God's involvement in all of this? Why did he prolong the carnage by sending the Israelites into battle twice without success? And does the fact that he did finally give them the victory mean that he approves of their actions? Finally, what has become of the Levite whose misrepresentation of what happened set the whole chain of events in motion? There's no indication that his deception was ever amassed. So where is he? Is he alive? Is he dead? Is he hiding in the Rimmon rock? Will he ever be made, to pay for what he did? One thing is certain, Israel has turned on itself, and a huge rift has been made in the fabric of its national life. And there is still unfinished business. What is to be done with the 600 men still in hiding? They are all that's left of the tribe of Benjamin. Can Israel ever recover from this and still become the united 12-tribe nation it once was? The moral outrage committed in Gibeah has terrible consequences. We have entered a very dark place where Israel seemed to have been given over to the full consequences of everybody doing what is right in their own eyes. Now, with the frenzy of battle over and their blood beginning to cool, the Israelites become conscious at last of the full report of what they've done. The tribe of Benjamin has been brought to the brink of extinction. And to make matters worse, now too late, they remember an oath that they had sworn at Mizpah. No one of us shall give his daughter in marriage to Benjamin. So the 600 remaining men are still in hiding, are either doomed to die childless, all their women and children have been slaughtered, or to marry foreigners. In either case, the tribe of Benjamin will cease to exist. It is perhaps strange, then, that the rest of Israel should care about this, given the destruction in which they have just engaged in. But the fact is that things often look very different after a battle than they do in the midst of it. And kinship was fundamental to the whole way ancient societies like Israel were structured and who they understood themselves to be. The Israelites have almost destroyed themselves, and they know it. They want to fix the damage, to heal themselves if possible, but how? The first attempt is to deal with the situation is to go to God again. On the face of it, that's good. It seems to show genuine sorrow and a desire to hear whatever God may have to say about the situation. But in reality, it falls well short of this. There's no admission of responsibility on Israel's part or appeal for God's help. In this case, the question, why, is more like an accusation. God, why have you allowed or even caused this terrible situation? Didn't you send us into battle against Benjamin again and again? Isn't that the reason why we are in this terrible mess? Why, God, have you done this to us? And it's an understandable question and not without some justification. God has punished the Benjamites severely and has made all Israel suffer in the process, because what happened in Gibeah is symptomatic of a moral malaise that is not confined to that tribe alone. The problem, though, is the failure or the refusal of the questioners to recognize their own responsibility for the particular situation they're in now. The real reasons why there are no wives for the remaining Benjamites are first, because the Israelites themselves have slaughtered them all, not in the battle itself, but in the orgy of destruction that followed it, in which all the towns of Benjamin and all the people in them were destroyed. And second, because of their oath, also without warrant, not to give any of their daughters in marriage to Benjamin. It is they, not God, who are to blame, and the attempt to deny it will only make matters worse. So blaming God for the trouble that we have brought on ourselves is an age-old strategy, but it never works because God cannot be fooled. If healing is to happen at all, it must begin with us taking responsibility for our own actions. God can see right through all the blame shifting of the Israelites here and is unmoved by their tears. They get no answer from him. Now that they've been left to their own devices, the Israelites cast about desperately for a solution, and at this point conveniently remember another oath that they had sworn at Mizpah, to put to death any who had not come to the assembly. The Benjamites had not come, of course, and had already been dealt with. Well, what about the others? Were there other parts of the Federation that not sent any representatives? A review is conducted, and it's discovered that no one came to the camp from Jabesh Gilead, and immediately a force of 12,000 men is sent to serve justice on them. But of course, this actually has nothing to do with justice. It's just a ruse to solve the problem at hand in a way that has a show of legitimacy. And again, the violence is extreme. All the people of this city are slaughtered, including women and children, except young virgins who had not known a man lying with him, who were seized by the raiders and carried back to their base in Shiloh. The one slightly mitigating element of this whole horrible episode is the word compassion in verse 6. The people of Israel had compassion for Benjamin, their brother, which is why they did what they did. But as we've seen, they themselves were the real cause of the problem that they're trying to solve. They were making others pay for their own wrongdoing. And so the decision to victimize the people of Jabesh Gilead smacks much more of the expediency than justice, and of compassion horribly distorted by the lack of any sound moral basis. And in spite of all the additional carnage involved, it did not achieve what it was supposed to do. Only 400 virgins were found, 200 short of the 600 they needed, so the chaos continued. Well, after some more fruitless wrestling with the issue, the leaders hit on a plan that might hold the key to finally solving their problem. They remember that there is an annual feast of the Lord, a religious festival nearby at Shiloh, and that as part of the celebration, the daughters of Shiloh, the local girls, come out to dance in the vineyard. So they tell the 200 Benjamites men still needing a wife to go and hide in the right moment, then seize a girl, each of them, and carry them off. Now we really hit rock bottom. Everything is wrong here. The festival itself is not easily identifiable as any of the three great annual festivals prescribed in the law of Moses, and none of which involves girls dancing in the vineyards. The association with the grape harvest suggests it might have been a semi-pagan, corrupt version of the Feast of Tabernacles. The festival itself is a manifestation of what is at the heart of the moral malaise that has overtaken the whole nation. The Lord is paid lip service, but people do as they please. So in that situation, the foundations of morality have been destroyed. Worse, an assumed obligation to obey God and thereby honor him has been used here as a pretext for doing evil. First, by slaughtering the people of Jabesh Gilead, and then by abducting, effectively stealing, the young men of Shiloh. The justification for both has been oaths sworn to the Lord in Mizpah. Here is a dishonoring of the name of God that is almost beyond belief. And at a purely human level, the most shocking aspect of what happened here in this final ploy to solve a problem caused by all the moral chaos is the total objectification and abuse of women. What started with the rape of the concubine in Gibeah has led to the abduction and the effective rape of 400 virgins in Jabesh Gilead, and ended with the seizure of 200 more in Shiloh. Well, to make matters worse, is it even possible that those who are engaged in this crime, even before they have committed, have worked out a justification that will absolve everybody involved in guilt? Women have been abducted, protest has been stifled, and no one has done anything about it at all, because all has been done out of compassion for Benjamin and fulfillment of solemn oaths taken before the Lord. But the truth is that Israel's leaders have forced others to do what they themselves swore not to do, and papered it all over with sophistry. They have solved their problem, but in such a way as to overturn all canons of truth and morality. They have created a world in which right is wrong and wrong is right, and landed the nation in complete moral bankruptcy. And the book of Judges is almost finished. Is this the way it is going to end, though in complete moral and spiritual darkness? Well, not quite. There are a few sentences left, and they contain some glimmers of hope. Amazingly, after all the chaos and the apparent death dive that Israel has been on these closing chapters, there is not oblivion, but return, rebuilding, living in towns and communities, the recovery of something approaching normal. Well, how can this be? It is not what Israel deserves, and certainly not something that they've achieved. Their actions have been flawed from the start, and even when they tried to make things better, they have made them worse. The key lies in the word inheritance. Then they went and returned to their inheritance. They went out from there, every man to his inheritance. Inheritance speaks of connection with the past and the possibility of a future. More specifically, it speaks here of God, of his promises and his faithfulness to them. God's promise to give Israel the land of Canaan as their inheritance arcs right across the books of the law, from Genesis to Deuteronomy and on into the book of Joshua. After his successful military campaigns, Joshua gave the land for an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal allotments in Joshua 11:23. And his way of describing what had happened was this: not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass in Joshua 21:45. The book of Joshua ended, and Joshua had dismissed his people, with every man going to his inheritance in Joshua 24:28. The fact that after this, all that happened, the book of Judges ends in the same way, is nothing short of miraculous. What it tells us is that God has not yet abandoned his wayward people, and therefore there is hope. The promise of inheritance, it still stands. So even the last verse, with its reminder of the problem that was nearly Israel's undoing, it contains a thread of hope in verse 25 of chapter 21. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everybody did what was right in his own eyes. These are the words of someone who looks back to the dark days that have now passed. Under God, Israel did have a future. After the Levite and his concubine in the civil war of Judges 20 and 21, came Boaz and Ruth, Hannah and Samuel, Saul and David and Solomon, and eventually one greater than Solomon, who established a new covenant, a greater inheritance, and a hope of which Israel can only dream. Later writers could even look back to the period of the Judges as a time when some had exemplary faith in Hebrews 11:32-33. It's hard to find anyone like that in the closing chapters of Judges, but they did exist. The book of Ruth will show us some. But even before we leave the book of Judges itself, there are some final reflections to be made on the terrible story that we've just considered today. First, the story of the Levite and his concubine. It shows us the kind of society we finally get when everybody does what is right in their own eyes. It is not a community of glorious freedom, and certainly not one of love. It is a chaotic and cruel society in which everything that is worst in human nature comes to the fore, where the institutions that should give order and deliver justice fail, where everyone suffers, and women in particular are abused. Second, it shows us that even in a nation like Israel, with all the experience of God that it has had and all those privileges of revelation, can become this kind of society if it abandons faithfulness to God's word. Benjamite Gibeah can become no better than a Canaanite city, and those who come to it seeking hospitality and nourishment can find themselves in a virtual Sodom. What a solemn warning this is to the church of our own day, which is departing more and more from obedience to the Word of God and is accommodating itself more and more to the values of the world around it. Third, and this is good news, it shows that the presence of chaos does not mean the absence of God. God is referred to frequently in Judges 20 and 21. People assemble to him, inquire of him. They weep before him. They offer sacrifices to him. They take oaths in his name and attend an annual feast to him in Shiloh. He is certainly present in their speech and at times and in some of their actions. And sometimes they obey him even when it's costly to do so. And when he commands them to continue their action against Benjamin, even though they want to stop, they obey twice. The problem is not that they are not religious or not willing to take God seriously at certain moments and in certain situations. It's certainly not that he's absent. The problem is that he has ceased to have any moral authority over them. Most of the time in their approach to everyday matters such as sex, marriage, hospitality, justice, and the treatment of women, among other things, everybody did what was right in their own eyes. This is why there is moral chaos and why all their institutions are breaking down. It is why their common life has ceased to be wholesome, good, and as God intended it to be, and why their society has become so chaotic and cruel. But God has been in the chaos, and twice we have been shown what he is doing. By withholding victory twice, he has made all Israel suffer, because all of them have been guilty of doing what was right in their own eyes, not just the rapist in Gibeah. In other words, he has disciplined his own people without abandoning them. And as we have seen, the end result has been better than anything they could ever imagine when things were at the worst, something only God could have brought about. So, brothers and sisters in Christ, when you are dismayed at the state of the church in our own day, especially its departure from the Word of God and its moral confusion, take heart. God is still present. The church has existed for more than 2,000 years and is going to continue to exist because it is God's church, and he has not abandoned it, and he never will. And at the end, he will bring about, in his time, will be glorious beyond all of our imagination, according to Revelation 21, 1-4. Well, I want to thank you for listening or watching today's episode of Reading the Bible Daily with Dave. My name is Dave, and today is March 12th, and we've looked at Judges 19:1 to Judges 21:25. Until tomorrow, may God bless you and keep you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Reading the Bible Daily with Dave podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show and rate us wherever you listen to podcasts. Be sure to also like, subscribe, or follow Servants of Grace on Facebook, Instagram, X, or YouTube. We appreciate your support.